Road Trippers, welcome to another episode of the Road Tripping Podcast. As always, it's great to have you tuning in. If this is your first episode, then welcome. If it's not your first episode, then welcome back. As always, we want to take this opportunity to say thank you for letting us provide you with content that helps your commute suck just a little less. It really means a lot to us that you're listening. Today, we are once again stepping back in time to bring you another tale from the past. One which you might have heard a little about through old westerns on TV, but not one that history classes focus their time on. So pull on your cowboy boots, strap on your six-shooter, and don't forget your 10-gallon hat as we journey to the American West to visit the life and times of William Frederick Cody, likely better known to you as the legendary showman, Buffalo Bill Cody.
William Frederick Cody was born February 26, 1845, to Isaac and Mary Ann Cody in Scott County, Iowa. He was the fourth child of eventually 8-child clan of the pioneering Codys. For the first few years of his life, the Codys were farmers, but his father Isaac wasn't content with that lifestyle. So he moved the family to the town of LeClaire, 15 miles outside of Davenport, and began running a stage line between Chicago and Davenport. This lasted only a few years because in 1849, like many of his fellow countrymen, gold fever set in with Isaac, and he made his mind up to cross the American Great Plains and make for the Pacific coast. The group he assembled to make the journey with, however, only lasted for a few miles, forcing Isaac to return home and abandon his plan to become a gold miner, to settle back once again to another farm. Isaac, however, was still not satisfied with farming and took to politics as an outlet. He was a member of what was called the Old Line Whigs, which was a second political party and counterpart to the Democratic Party that existed prior to the formation of the Republican Party in 1854. The Whigs were abolitionists, which meant that they were against slavery, and met often at various rallies and conventions to discuss the matter and what they wanted for the area that they lived in. That was where he was on the night William had to fetch him when his brother Samuel, who had been trying to show off his horsemanship, was crushed to death when his horse reared and then fell on him. The sadness and grief felt by the whole family at Samuel's death influenced the decision of the family to leave Iowa and depart for the unsettled lands of the Kansas Territory in the spring of 1852. You're probably wondering why I spent the last few minutes talking about Isaac and not his son William or little Billy, whom this show is about, right? Well, that's because of Isaac's influence on young William as he grew up, and especially as he moved out to Kansas, where Isaac has set up a trading post. In Cody's autobiography, he mentions that for the first time during that move, he saw slaves up close, armed cowboys, real Indians, professional mounted military horsemen on parade, hundreds and hundreds of covered wagons, and the effect of disease outbreaks like cholera had on those wagon trains. But he remembered probably the most fondly of all memories, and that was that he slept for the first time outdoors and upon the ground.
It has always amazed me that ever since I have gotten to know Molly, despite the size of the population of the world, the two of us coming from different states, two different types of backgrounds, two completely different lines of work, that we keep finding out how many people we run across that we both know for entirely different reasons. For instance, I once met an American woman while I was working in the Democratic Republic of Congo, of all places, that it turned out Molly knew from working on a contract together for one of her previous employers roughly around the same time. I tell you this to impress upon you that even though the world is huge, and you would think things like this should not happen, they most certainly do, and a bit more commonly than you would think possible. In fact, one of little Billy Cody's main influences in life, other than his father, turned up basically on his doorstep the same way. One day, a drove of horses approached from the west, coming over the California Trail into the valley where Isaac's trading post was located. 7 or 8 mounted men, all wearing large sombreros and buckskins, follow 2 or 3 pack mules or horses, closed in closely behind the driven horses. They made their camp along a nearby stream, and one of the men came up to meet Isaac. Cody described the newcomer in his autobiography as about 6 feet 2 inches tall, well-built, and had a light, springy, and wiry step. He wore a broad-brimmed California hat and was dressed in a complete suit of buckskin, beautifully trimmed and beaded. After some initial conversation, the man offered to break in one of the ponies that Billy had been trying to work with. Billy and Isaac agreed, and not only did he break the horse in, but put on a dazzling display of horsemanship that awed and wowed the young boy. Now have broken the ice, so to speak, the newcomer and Isaac sat down in the shade to talk, only to discover that the newcomer was actually a nephew of Isaac's, the son of his sister Sophia, who had run away from home as a young boy by the name of Horace Billings. Most of the rest of that day was taken up by Horace telling the Codys about his adventures at sea, living on the Sandwich Islands, which was the previous English name for the Hawaiian Islands, and how he had been with a circus for a couple of years as a bareback rider. Horace then demonstrated his ability by riding bareback on one of Billy's ponies with absolutely no effort, thrilling the father and son to no end. It didn't take long for Horace to become Billy's idol, taking him everywhere he went, while he taught Billy how to ride and catch wild ponies with a lasso and the art of bringing a horse under easy control.
Billy also spent a lot of time with the Indians of the Kickapoo tribe. He played their sports and learned to use their weapons, becoming very friendly with them, even learning their language to some degree. He had a great deal of respect for them and all they could teach him. In fact, Billy was always learning something new. It wasn't long before he met Mr. William Russell, who was in the freight business. He took an interest in young Cody. He taught Billy all about wagons, wagon masters, hunters, teamsters, how to handle cattle and mules, and about moving freight across the country. In 1854, Isaac was asked by some people to step up and give a speech about whether the new territory of Kansas should be a slave state or not. If you remember, Isaac was an abolitionist, and the crowd that day was not really in his camp in their beliefs. But Isaac didn't temper his speech. He said that the territory of Kansas would not be a slave state, but remain a white state only, which highly upset the crowd. So much so that a man stepped up to him with a bowie knife and stabbed him twice. Isaac survived the attack, but after he recovered, the family's business and personal safety was constantly at risk. In fact, a group of men even came up to their home looking to take him into custody so they can hang him one night. Isaac only just managed to escape. By the spring of 1855, the pro-slavery men of the area had taken everything that the family valued, including Billy's favorite horse. Desperate, and with Isaac away for his safety, Billy decided to step up and help his family and got a job to drive cattle for Mr. Russell. His mother didn't want him to go. Keep in mind, trippers, that at this point, Billy was just 10 years old. So he ran away from home to take a job and earn $25 a month that he was promised. During the winter of 1856, Isaac caught a severe cold and in combination with the stab wounds he received years earlier, stayed in poor health until his eventual death of kidney disease in April of 1857. Billy, knowing that he needed to support his family, would eventually go on to spend the next 7 years working for Russell driving cattle, being a wagon master and pony express rider, and attending school in the winter months when he was able to.
About a month after his father died, Billy had his first run-in with hostile Indians. While on one of his cattle herding trips, he and the company of men he was with reached Plum Creek on the South Platte River just west of Old Fort Kearny and made camp. They heard shots being fired and whoops and cries from a party of Indians who intended to catch them off guard. The men managed to get to a protected position and fired upon the advancing force, but to no avail, as they were getting hemmed into a limited area. The men decided to follow the creek to the river, and then the river to the old fort, and reinforcements if possible. Using the creek bed as protection was having a fairly good success at keeping the men safe, but since the Indians were still harrowing them, the men moved at a quick pace. Billy, being the youngest, still only about 11 years old, had gradually fallen behind. At about 10 o'clock that night, while staying close to the bank, Billy saw an Indian pop his head over the bank to search for them. Instead of hurrying ahead and alarming the men in a quiet way, he instantly aimed his gun at the head and fired. The next moment saw a 6-foot dead Indian come tumbling into the river. Billy was scared. He had killed his first man and his first Indian, and highly expected more of them to surge over the bank and kill him in return. They did not, however, and the party of men managed to escape. Soon Billy found himself being interviewed by a local reporter, and then shortly thereafter found his name in print on a story that relayed the events of the encounter to its readers. The reporter called him youngest Indian slayer on the plains, and Billy took to the notoriety very eagerly.
From 1862 to 1863, an expedition against the Comanche Indians was organized, and Bill Cody was anxious to be part of it. He joined the 9th Kansas Volunteer Regiment and later the Red-Legged Scouts as a guide and scout for the soldiers. While they had some minor contact with the Comanche during this time, Cody stated it was not noteworthy. We bring it up because it was the first instance of his use as a scout for the military that was mentioned in his autobiography, and was the capacity he served in most during this time of his life. 1863 also saw the death of Cody's beloved mother, whom he loved dearly. The rest of his younger siblings were transferred to the care of his sister Julia and her husband, seemingly freeing Cody of any familiar responsibility. He took her death very hard and became reckless in his actions and the company he kept, often drinking to excess. Cody, now 18, stated that because of his drinking, he eventually found himself enlisted in the 7th Kansas Regiment of the Union Army without knowing how he actually enlisted, and by the spring of 1864, found himself heading for Tennessee, then eventually to Mississippi, being employed as a scout. His service as a scout and spy assisted greatly in defeating the forces the Union troops came up against. By late 1864, Cody, having been detached to military headquarters in St. Louis, met and fell in love with a young lady who more than once, while out for a morning ride on his horse, had seen her riding her own horse. Few things caught Bill's eye more quickly than a young lady riding a horse who demonstrated great horsemanship qualities. Bill Cody desired to establish an acquaintance with this young lady. Unfortunately, none of his friends knew her formally to be able to introduce them, and he was frustrated with the possibility that they would never meet. At that time, a man and lady had to be formally introduced before they could court. In time, a divine intervention occurred. While out riding his horse one morning, he saw this beautiful lady, whom he admired from afar, riding on a runaway horse. The bridle rein had broken, and the horse was running wild. A rescue was needed for this damsel in distress. Bill Cody himself became the knight in shining armor. Because of this one incident, their acquaintance came easy. For more to love, Bill Cody lost no time taking advantage of this chance meeting. His past offered few opportunities to enjoy the feminine society. This accounts for his promptness in courting the lady he so long admired from afar. He became the accepted suitor of Margaret Louise Federici before the Civil War ended in 1865. Knowing that he needed to be financially stable before he could wed, once he was discharged in 1865, he got her to consent to agree to marry him in the near future. For about a year, Cody drove stagecoaches back in Kansas until he couldn't stand being away from her any longer and went to St. Louis to marry his beloved. Cody promised his wife that he was done with the plains and bought a hotel, which he named Golden Rule House. From the accounts I managed to find, it appeared that he did have a head for business and could have made landlord business work for him, but it wasn't the kind of life for a man like we've been discussing. No, Cody only lasted for about 6 months before he was wanting to head back to the plains. He sold off the hotel and eventually got work as a scout stationed at Fort Ellsworth.
In the spring of 1867, Cody met and escorted General Custer from Fort Hays to Fort Larned. The event was a minor footnote at that time, but in that 65-mile trip, the two became good friends, with Cody often serving as one of the general's scouts. And after his defeat at Little Bighorn, avenged Custer's death by helping to kill those responsible at the Battle of Warbonnet Creek. In 1867, Cody took up the trade that gave him his nickname, hunting buffalo, to feed the construction crews of the Kansas Pacific Railroad. The nickname originally referred to Bill Comstock. Cody earned the nickname by killing 4,860 American bison, commonly known as buffalo, over the next 8 months. He and Comstock eventually competed in a shooting match over the exclusive right to use the name, which Cody, of course, won. The railroad paid him $500 a month for his effort, which was difficult due to the numerous encounters with Indians in the area he hunted.
Hello, trippers. Do you have a podcast that you want to cross-promote? Or are you a business with a product that you would like to advertise? Then reach out to us at theroadtrippingpodcast.com to see how we can help. Your success is our success, so let us succeed together by getting the word out about your product or show to other listeners and potential consumers.
Now back to the show. In 1869, Buffalo Bill Cody found a fan in Ned Buntline, an obscure writer with little talent but loads of imagination. Always looking for a new story, Buntline took the stories he heard from Cody himself and others that knew him and turned them into dime novels that were a huge success. Cody found them amusing even though most of the tales were completely untrue. Buntline claims that of all the most popular stories of Cody, he himself wrote a dozen of them. Because of his expertise hunting buffalo and his widely known name in the West, in January 1872, Cody was made a scout for Grand Duke Alexei Alexandrovich of Russia's highly publicized royal hunt. Cody was responsible for negotiating with Spotted Tail of the Sioux Indians, who had the right to hunt the buffalo in that area, and to get him to come show the Grand Duke how they hunted and to generally entertain the Duke's party. This was made difficult due to Cody's past warring with the various tribes, but he managed to complete the task. The Grand Duke was fascinated by the Sioux, especially one particular maiden, but he wasn't the only one, as General Custer was showing his interest in the chief's daughter. With the press following the Duke's every move, Cody received a great deal more exposure. This experience was followed up by his first trip to the eastern states.
Fun fact: Cody was awarded the Medal of Honor in 1872 for actions against Indians at South Fork at the Loup River in Nebraska. However, his name was stricken from the record of Medal of Honor recipients in 1916, along with 910 others. Since he was a scout and thus considered a civilian, not eligible for the award. In fact, even though he was often called Colonel Cody, he never held an officer's rank officially at any time. The honor was returned to him in 1989 by special act of Congress. Buntline had written to Cody often in the hopes that he could get him back east and perform on stage. He promised him that he would be quite famous if he did. Cody finally relented and recruited a fellow Fort McPherson scout, John Texas Jack Omohundro, to accompany him to Chicago. Buntline met the scouts turned actors in Chicago, but to their amazement, they found that Buntline had no script, even though the play was to open at Nixon's Amphitheater in less than a week. Buntline penned Scouts of the Prairie in 4 hours and hired 10 aspiring thespians off the Chicago streets to portray Indians in his little drama. He also acquired the services of a lovely Italian actress, Despina Moralacci, to play the Indian heroine. She was well known for introducing the can-can to the United States in 1867. Open night saw a crowd of 2,500 people, but the play had no real plot, which was fine, as Cody forgot all of his lines anyway. It didn't really matter, because the men were handsome, and Moralacci beautiful, and the action non-stop. Scouts of the Prairie turned out to be a great success. Even theater critics had to admit that while it might not be art, it was certainly entertainment of a unique sort. The Western had been born, and popular, mass-marketed entertainment would never be the same. The play toured the East Coast, always to enthusiastic audiences and full box office collections. By the time the tour ended in June 1873, Cody was fully committed to a stage career. He no longer had a need for buntline, and they soon parted company. For the 1873-74 theatrical season, Cody renamed his troupe the Buffalo Bill Combination and hired Fred G. Meader to create a new drama for them to perform. Scouts of the Plains opened at Williamsport, Pennsylvania on September 8th, in which both Buffalo Bill and Texas Jack played themselves, with Moralachi playing another Indian maiden. Co-starring was another authentic Western hero, Cody's old friend, Wild Bill Hickok. Wild Bill did not take well to being on stage, once even shooting out a spotlight that was aimed at him, and then left the production. From 1873 to 1885, Cody toured the various frontier dramas, always portraying himself in every play he starred in. Each drama, of course, was supposedly based on a true and authentic adventure of his past, though most likely were highly dramatized and very likely not even close to real events. The tour in 1876 was interrupted in April by a telegram from Mrs. Cody informing her husband that their 5-year-old son Kit was desperately ill with scarlet fever. Cody quickly returned home and was able to hold his son one last time before he died in his arms. Cody was devastated and, like he had been with his mother's death, turned to a reckless nature that he later regretted. Cody was determined to answer the call of Phil Sheridan, Eugene Carr, and other Army officers to return to the West for what all assumed would be the last great Indian War. After a final show in Wilmington, Delaware, on June 3rd, Cody and Texas Jack split up the troop, and Buffalo Bill headed west to join Colonel Merritt's 5th Cavalry in Wyoming Territory.
The regiment was serving under Brigadier General George Crook, whose mission it was to defend against the Sioux led by Sitting Bull, Crazy Horse, and Gall. They had defied the orders of the government to report to a reservation and to sell the Grant administration the Black Hills, which were sacred to the Indians, but quite literally a gold mine just waiting to be taken by the U.S. Crazy Horse turned out to be a much more formidable opponent than Crook had given him credit for, and his forces were much larger than expected, so Colonel Merritt's 5th Cavalry was requested as support. Merritt, having received other intelligence stating that hundreds of Cheyenne were headed towards them from Nebraska, decided instead to head them off by blocking the Powder River Trail. His troops marched a punishing 85 miles in 31 hours to reach Warbonnet Creek, where they set up camp to await the Cheyenne. Before dawn on July 17, 1876, Merritt ordered Cody out to scout Little Wolf's advancing Cheyenne. For some reason only known to him, Cody dressed that morning in one of the stage costumes he had brought with him from the East. A Mexican outfit of black velvet pants, trimmed in scarlet and flared at the ankles, a red silk shirt, and topped off by a broad-brimmed beaver sombrero. Quickly locating the Cheyenne village, he returned to find the camp on full alert, as sentries had spotted Cheyenne scouts nearby. Cody reported to Merritt atop a slight conical hill overlooking Warbonnet Creek. Directly across the valley in the distance, a party of Cheyenne scouts formed opposite the 5th Cavalry. Merritt ordered Carr to saddle up to the regiment. Cody then noticed that the Indians were watching a distant supply train that was headed for Merritt's compound. 2 dispatch riders from the wagon train were galloping toward the camp and had caught the attention of the Cheyenne, who sent warriors out to intercept them. Cody asked Merritt for permission to engage the hostiles with his scouts, and the colonel gave the go-ahead. Lieutenant King was to watch from the hill and send in the scouts just before the Cheyenne could intercept the messengers. The men charged the surprise warriors, scattering them with a rifle volley. As Cody's horse splashed across Warbonnet Creek, a Cheyenne warrior turned to meet him. His name was Yellowhair, though often incorrectly referred to as Yellow Hand. And like Cody, he had dressed for combat. He wore his feather bonnet, a special charm, 10 bracelets, and a beautiful beaded belt, from which he hung a blonde scalp that inspired his name. His unique breechcloth had been fashioned from a cotton American flag. As his handful of companions fled, Yellowhair boldly stood his ground and fired at Cody. Yellowhair's shot missed, but Cody placed a round through the Cheyenne warrior's leg, dropping his calico pony. At the same moment, Cody's horse stumbled, sending him tumbling onto the ground. Clear of their horses, Cody and the wounded Yellowhair fired simultaneously. The Cheyenne missed, Buffalo Bill did not. Cody rushed forward to scalp the fallen warrior. Raising the top knot and war bonnet aloft, he cried, "The first scalp for Custer!" Merritt ordered the regiment forward, and the cavalrymen cheered as they galloped past Cody in pursuit of the retreating warriors. The 5th Cavalry pursued the Cheyenne some 30 miles back to the Red Cloud Agency, where they quickly blended into the general population. King recalled that the Indians were as impressed as the whites with Cody. He said, "One and all they wanted to see Buffalo Bill, and whenever he moved, they followed him with all-filled eyes." He wore the same dress in which he had burst upon them in yesterday's fight, a Mexican costume of black velvet, slashed with scarlet and trimmed in silver buttons and lace, one of his theatrical garbs, in which he had done much execution before the floodlights in the States, and which now became of intensified value. The 5th Cavalry next moved north to reinforce Crook's column and pursue Sitting Bull's band. Crook's huge command, the Bighorn and Yellow Expedition, had more than 2,000 men. Buffalo Bill was appointed chief of scouts with some 20 men working under him. The Indians scattered, and the lumbering army columns had no chance of catching them, so retreated from the field. On August 22nd, Cody asked for his discharge and gave up scouting on the plains ever again.
Cody soon put up a new theatrical combination together, featuring the poet scout Captain Jack Crawford, a companion from the Great Sioux War. The new play was The Red Right Hand, or Buffalo Bill's first scalp for Custer, a 5-act play that was, according to Cody, without heads or tails, and it made no difference at which act we commenced the performance. It was his most successful play, not least of the show's attraction were Yellowhair's scalp and feathered war bonnet, which drew a lot of complaints from the press and the clergy due to the barbaric display. Cody withdrew his trophies from the theater windows and confined himself to brandishing them on stage, which only served to increase the revenues because people wanted to see the scalp. In 1883, inspired by the success of a July 4th rodeo he staged at his North Platte, Nebraska ranch, Cody initiated his famous Wild West. This outdoor spectacle combined such rodeo standbys as bucking bronchos, wild steers, roping, and riding with historical motifs from his stage plays, including the Deadwood Stage, the Pony Express, and Custer's Last Stand. Various animals from the western wilds were on display, as were such famous frontier celebrities such as Pawnee Bill, Frank North, Sitting Bull, and of course, Buffalo Bill himself. The cowboy, once a pejorative name, now became an American hero in the form of William Levi Buck Taylor, the king of the cowboys, and Johnny Baker, the cowboy kid. Displays of marksmanship were provided by Cody, Baker, and most notably Annie Oakley, Little Sure Shot. As the years passed, Cody updated the historical pageants in the Wild West. He never used the word show to include the Spanish-American War, the Boxer Rebellion, and the Philippine Insurrection. But such signature events as an Indian attack on the Deadwood Stage and the first scalp for Custer remained standard fare throughout the show's long run. Cody took his Wild West to London in 1887 for Queen Victoria's Jubilee, where it was an international sensation. When they boarded the ship for Europe, the entourage included 83 saloon passengers, 38 steerage passengers, 97 Indians, 180 horses, 18 buffalo, 10 elk, 5 Texan steers, 4 donkeys, and 2 deer. Buffalo Bill used them to give the Europeans a taste of the now vanishing American frontier. He exploited the romantic possibilities of the American West, making them intelligible to millions who had no other knowledge of the frontier than what he presented. He became a buckskin-clad goodwill ambassador, winning the hearts of the world as no American had since Benjamin Franklin. Realizing celebrity is fleeting, Cody invested in a number of business ventures to ensure a profitable retirement. In 1894, Cody began work with George T. Beck to develop a reclamation project along the Shoshone River, then named Stinking Water River, in Wyoming's Bighorn Basin. Using his celebrity, Cody promoted the irrigation project and emerging community of Cody, Wyoming, named in his honor. Cody and Beck secured funds from Phoebe Hearst, William Randolph Hearst's wealthy mother, and a group of investors from Buffalo, New York. Unfortunately, Cody's dream of an agricultural empire in northwest Wyoming exceeded both his financial resources and his capabilities. Cody's fledgling Wyoming empire did not expand until the Chicago, Quincy, and Burlington Railway built a line to Cody. The coming of the railroad also brought the Lincoln Land Company, which took over the selling of the town lots. The newly created Reclamation Service, later named the Bureau of Reclamation, finished developing Cody's proposed expansion of the irrigation project. Additionally, Cody offered a portion of his claim to the Mormon Church, which ensured the successful reclamation of the land in question. In addition to promoting reclamation of the American West, Cody established a stage line from Cody, Wyoming, to the east entrance of the Yellowstone National Park. Beginning with the Irma Hotel, built in 1902, Cody later completed the smaller Wapiti Inn and Pakasha Teepee to serve tourists traveling along the North Fork to the Shoshone River and to Yellowstone National Park. Cody joined other interested parties to pressure the U.S. Cavalry, then in charge of managing Yellowstone, to allow automobile traffic through Yellowstone to expand Western tourism. Cody's visions of economic development in the West were lucrative for many, including future generations, but Cody's various investments did not succeed as he had hoped. Many of those investments, including patent medicines, a Cody Military Institute, Bighorn Basin oil fields, and the Campo Bonito mine in Arizona, failed to produce great profits, forcing Cody to remain with the Wild West exhibition to ensure some source of income. After a 3-decade run, 10 of which was in Europe, Cody made and lost several fortunes. The Wild West extravaganza finally failed in 1913. He toured for 2 more seasons with the Sells Floto Circus and made his final appearance with the Miller Brothers' 101 Ranch Wild West in 1916. The attending crowd gave him a 10-minute standing ovation. On January 10, 1917, William F. Cody passed away at his sister's home in Denver, Colorado. The city fathers there buried him in a concrete-lined steel vault. They feared that the citizens of Cody, Wyoming, the town of Buffalo Bill had promoted and made his home after 1902, might attempt to steal the body. Buffalo Bill was a valuable commodity, dead or alive. No doubt Cody would have understood. It was, after all, show business. Thousands of adoring fans mourned the loss and lined the streets to pay their last respects to the great scout as his body was laid to rest in its grave on Lookout Mountain. Cody's last surviving child, Irma Louise, and her husband, Fred Garlow, passed away during the Great Flu epidemic in 1918. Louisa resided in Cody, raising Irma's 3 children until her death in 1921. Her body lies in rest next to her husband at Lookout Mountain.
Well, that's all the time we have for in this episode of the Road Tripping Podcast. But if you liked it and want to hear more, please subscribe to the show feed and give us a 5-star rating on your favorite podcast directory. The more positive reviews we receive, the more trippers will be able to find us, and the faster we will grow, thus able to bring you new content. Be sure to visit our website, theroadtrippingpodcast.com, to keep updated on future shows, leave show suggestions, and see all the ways to find and interact with us all in one place. If you are able and feeling generous, then a link to our Patreon page can be found under the support link on the homepage. As always, until next we meet, stay safe, trippers.